At a factory owner's lunch, the elegantly dressed men come on in and boast about the wealth that they have made through their industry. Others boast of the fact that they crank out as many products as possible, forcing their laborers to work in harsh conditions and up to 19 hours a day. Some are more humane though, and allow workers to even take breaks and will only accept children over the age of 9. But the reality was, being a factory owner largely meant that you could treat your factory workers as you pleased. But that was life in the early 19th century. For now. Hello and welcome to the channel. I am of course the Knight of History, and this is part number 3 of a 5-part series all about the age of Reformation. This time of course we're going to talk about the social change that thankfully happened. But before we get into that, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Now let's get into it. Now yes, some industrialists did try to improve the livelihoods of their employees. However, most of the factory owners were more concerned with profits than the welfare of their workers. Industrialists saw their factories as private properties, and in line with the laissez-faire assumptions of the day, they believed that the government had absolutely no right to interfere with their work. By 1830, there was actually growing support in Parliament for factory reform. It was mainly led by a Tory noble, the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, Anthony Ashley Cooper, or Lord Ashley. He was an evangelical Christian with a profound humanitarian drive. Parliamentary committees and a royal commission were actually established to investigate child labour in factories itself, and they uncovered horrific stories of cruelty and abuse. Just 3 years later, in 1833, Parliament passed the Factory Act, making it illegal for textile factories to employ children under the age of 9, and children under the age of 13 could only work for 8 hours a day, with 2 hours set aside for schooling. Importantly, there were 4 full-time factory inspectors employed to make sure that the law was actually being enforced and followed. In 1840, Lord Ashley introduced an Act of Parliament banning the use of climbing boys. In 1842, he helped the Miners Act be passed, prohibiting coal mines from employing women or girls and boys under the age of 10. Here he used a shock tactic, showing illustrations of young girls working in semi-nude states due to the great heat, of course. But they were working right next to full-grown men. Many more factory acts were thankfully passed throughout the Victorian period, placing further limits on working hours and improving factory safety. At first, workers could do very little to improve their own pay and conditions. The Combination Act of 1799 made it absolutely illegal for workers to come together and form trade unions. This prevented them from making collective demands or forming a strike to make sure that their demands are met. The Combinations Acts were repealed in 1824, leading to the growth of union organizations. The very first great campaign for workers' rights originated not in the industrial north, but in the rural areas of Dorset. Here, the accepted minimum wage for a farmer was just 10 shillings a week. But in the village of Tolpuddle, a group of farm labourers had their wages of 9 shillings a week cut to 7 shillings a week, with threats that they would fall even further if they continued to make demands on the landowners. In response, in 1833, 6 farm labourers formed a friendly society similar to a union. Each of them took a part of a secretive initiation ceremony, which involved being blindfolded and swearing an oath of loyalty. In response to this, a local landowner and magistrate had the 6 men arrested and charged with taking unlawful oaths. The men were actually found guilty and forcibly exiled to Australia in 1834 for 7 years of hard labour. The harshness of the sentence outraged the working class across Britain, and the 6 men became known as the Tolpuddle Martyrs. In April 1834, an estimated 25,000 workers marched on London asking for the martyrs' sentences to be overturned, and they delivered a petition of 800,000 signatures to the Prime Minister. 2 years later, the Home Secretary, Lord Russell, granted a free pardon to the men who were returned home safely, and the country celebrated. Now, since the Tudor period, local parishes had dealt with the poor and unemployed by paying them financial relief. But by the 1830s, the costs of parish reliefs had risen to £7 million per year. Social reforms suspected that the relief was encouraging able-bodied people to become lazy and actually avoid finding employment. In 1834, Parliament actually passed a Poor Law Amendment Act, which ended the payment of the relief of able-bodied workers. Instead, it gave them an opportunity to work and employment in the newly built workhouses. However, to discourage the poor from claiming relief in these workhouses, conditions were made deliberately terrible and unpleasant. Families were split up with different areas for men, women, and children. Inmates had to sleep in large dormitories and wear prison-style uniforms. Work consisted of hard menial jobs like breaking stones, and inmates were not allowed any luxuries at all, like drinking alcohol, smoking, or even keeping personal items. The Victorian poor soon lived in fear that they may have to go to a workhouse. These places were so harsh and horrible, but also there were people working against them. In one case in 1846, a workhouse master, the person that's supposed to be looking after the inmates, Colin McDougall, sold food that was meant for the inmates, leaving them to starve. They crushed bones to make fertilizer, and they were found sucking out the rotting marrows of bones for sustenance. Despite such scandals, workhouses continued operating all the way until 1930. Now that social reform was finally happening, it's time for the political reforms to follow suit and give the common man the vote and allow everyone to have a say in the democratic manner. So please don't forget to join us next time. But for now, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The more you know.